Thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with you, and I've been enjoying listening to others, and have to acknowledge sort of the smart civility and focus of so many that I've heard comment. I'm, I guess, more politician than banker, having been most of my life in the public sector, and I guess I should start with the honest comment that elected people like to blame someone else when there's an economic downturn and take credit for it when things turn around and go up. And so I guess I'll try to take some credit for something, but the truth is it's the tide. And I don't mean to say we're helpless before it and shouldn't do anything to try to be smart about managing those currents and preparing and being catalytic and do smart investments from the public sector side. But the fact is we were down because there was a national downturn, an international downturn that was very substantial, and then an upturn that we felt in California that made a big difference. But just to sort of sketch how bad it did get, 1,300,000 jobs lost in California, unemployment that went from about 5% to 13% of the workforce, home prices that dropped 40% in the major metropolitan areas, personal and business bankruptcies that increased 58%. So housing and new commercial construction that essentially stopped. As the banker, of course, for the state, there were those moments. I run a very large bank for the state, and among other things, about $1 billion or so in commercial paper. And when it's rolling every 3 days, and my professional staff say, well, we're going to now pay 11.25% for 3-day paper, you know there's a real problem in the economic system. And of course, you know the sort of U.S. circumstances of $70 trillion that private financing found to invest in exotic mortgages or offshore investments or whatever, and subprime loans in California at least went from about 6% of the loans being made to very risky borrowers for homes to almost 1 out of 4 that were being made just before the downturn. I visited with various friends here yesterday to just ask what was going on, and one of the things I kept sort of hearing is, yeah, we may do that here too. So I guess the only advice I can make about that is it's a bad idea, don't do it. California today, of course, we just passed Russia and Italy in terms of GDPs being the 8th largest economy in that respect in the world. Unemployment is down to about 6%. Personal income is growing 5 or 6% a year. There are more jobs in the state today than there were before the Great Recession. So what happened? Well, first of all, the tide. We are in California, the economy is a bit schizophrenic. The downs are really down and the ups are really up. And so it was just time to have the up start in substantial ways, but it was difficult in the public sector. When there's that kind of squeeze on private sector, obviously revenues that are generated are diminished substantially, and so what it meant for a state where our budgets are school spending, schools and universities, health and welfare, and prisons, you cut them all. And that's basically what happened. The state budget is, the bad times it would be about $75 billion. Today it's about $105 billion. And so when deficits are running 25 to 30 billion a year, roughly a third of your budget, that necessitates at least two things. Everyone talks about let's do it more efficiently, good idea, harder to do, but that's something that every politician of every flavor says. But mostly it's tax and cut spending. And we cut at a ratio of about 9-to-1. So there were 90% cuts, essentially, to address the shortfall. For a while, there was very substantial denial, not wanting to do it or being politically unable to do it. One of the particular problems we had in California is the adoption of a state budget was governed by a constitutional provision that required a two-thirds vote. There are only 3 states in the United States that required a two-thirds vote. Part of the consequence is gridlock, argument, inability to govern. The minority party there, Republicans, would have kind of a long policy wish list that they would produce each summer. The Democrats would eventually say, no, we won't do that, and then there'd be some sort of fig leaf enactment to pretend they did so that a budget could get adopted. But it took 3 months to kind of go through that process, and every day there's sort of headlines saying, gee, they can't govern, they can't, it's sort of like Washington, D.C. today, except in Washington, D.C. it's really true. The optics of the budget impasses were terrible. So one of the things that happened in 2010, we write laws in California, and sort of a lot of Western states do in the United States, by initiative, by petition. It goes to the ballot. It's not an idea I necessarily recommend. It's one of the things rating agencies regularly say, well, do you have to do it that way when we rate your debt? And we say, well, it's a given. Once you start that, you can't stop. And so in this instance, though, the governor, Brown, and others went to the ballot with a proposal to change our rule so that a budget could be adopted by a majority vote, not a two-thirds vote. It passed. One of the results of that, other than mostly the Republicans in the legislature are observers rather than participants, is that budgets get adopted on time. And the optics of being able to govern changed. But still, there were these very significant cuts that were hard for people to do. There were 4 years of pretense, some budget gimmickry. I guess my favorite, that kind of gives gimmicks a bad name, is let's pay a lot of bills that are due before the end of June, pay them on July 1st, so that year's budget was balanced. There were other things of that nature. Governor Schwarzenegger was responsible for getting to the ballot with a bond issue, which I have the duty to continue to pay on, but the money was spent 8 years ago to address the deficit. So very sort of the most offensive sort of long-term bonding, for financing long-term debt to pay for operational expenses. Eventually, you have to do something about that other than pay it off, which I hope we will do this year. But finally, everybody said, okay, and I'm kind of the town grouch that has to keep saying, hey, you guys, remember balanced budgets? I guess I'd be sort of labeled a liberal Democrat, although I'm not sure I quite understand how that applies these days, given my responsibilities, but I keep saying balanced budget, balanced budget, balanced budget, and you only have 2 ways to do it. Tax, probably can't get that done, cut. Let's do that. And eventually they did. There were some shifts that occurred from local governments, which essentially are police, fire, and parks, to local school systems. So there was some shifting around of that sort that took place, but mostly it was very difficult cuts. It's hard to eliminate in the healthcare system dental care for old people. Now you get to enjoy TV ads from New York, so you get to see during a campaign how unwise it is for a politician to say, well, they can eat soup. if you make that kind of remark, you tend to see it during the next ad cycle. And so there were very significant cuts of those sorts enacted. Then 2 years into his governorship, the governor again went back to the ballot with an initiative proposal because there weren't 2/3 in each house required, which even though we can do a budget by a majority now, we can't do a tax by a majority. It takes 2/3 vote. And there wasn't that agreement, so they went to an initiative proposal, which enacted a 4-year increase in our sales taxes. Now, the sales taxes in California it varies a little locally, but 9 to 10%. They added 1/4%, which does generate a couple $2 billion, and personal income taxes on the top end. So people that would earn more than $250,000 a year, there'd be an increase of about 1% on their state income taxes. So the combination of substantial cuts, which were $25 billion, eventual economic upturn, and these new tax increases, the personal income tax is in place for 7 years. Politicians always label these temporary. Those of us that know haven't yet seen a temporary tax, but it will require a redebate and redecision by voters if, when they are going to expire, there's a need to continue some of them. Now, just as the banker, I had some responsibilities, which were I manage a big money pool of short-term money. It's about $60 billion in that of state and local government. During the downturn, I made money on it. So a lot of people in finance were losing money. We were always pretty conservative about how that was invested, so it made money. We refinanced debt, taking advantage of these new debt markets. So there were existing bond issues that had been passed in many, many years, and we refinanced and shaved almost $2 billion off of debt obligations from doing that. And then there were significant infrastructure spending, more debt issuance at new low rates for schools, transportation systems, water systems, and so on. And part of the current debate in California is the governor contemplates very significant public investments in a major high-speed rail program from northern to southern California. It's quite controversial, but it's one he's very committed to. And similarly, water transfers from north to south to meet water needs in the future. There was one thing not done. There were a lot of cuts, public sector jobs cut, but no contracting out wasn't part of our discussion. And I know that comes up here and elsewhere, wasn't done. There were tax cuts that were significant. There were some increases, personal taxes essentially, sales tax on manufacturing equipment, R&D, biotech eliminated, film tax credits to try to maintain that sector, and then a sort of generous fund that the governor could use to induce business relocations and expansion in the state by tax abatement programs, and hundreds of millions of dollars committed to that. So that's kind of the story of California. I don't know if there is time to respond to a question or a comment. I'm happy to if there are any.